So one of my favourite places on earth, really, I think, is Jamberoo Abbey. So it's the Benedictine convent, the Benedictine Abbey that's down on Jamberoo Mountain Road, so about an hour or hour and a half or so from here. And I've been going there for many, many years. I was talking to the nun that is my spiritual director, or was my spiritual director. I was talking to her one time, and she was explaining something about her life before she'd gone into the Benedictines. And we worked out that in that conversation, as it went on, we worked out that one of the other nuns there at Jamberoo had known my mum just after mum left school, just after mum finished school. So so I'm having the conversation about 10 years ago, so going back a long time. And so when I next saw Sister Ancilla, this is the nun that knew mum, when we were introduced, and she looked at me and she gave me one of those nun kind of looks. Do you know the kind of look I mean? If you know nuns, it's sort of this look, it could easily be scary, but it was actually quite beautiful, right? That was the look, okay? And she looked at me, and she didn't put her hands on my cheeks, but it kind of almost felt like she did. She looked at me deeply and she went, "Oh, you are son of Jean. You are son of Jean. My mother's name's Jean." Which I don't think I'd ever been described quite that way before. I don't think anybody had ever said like that, you are son of Jean. I went home and told Mum about it, and she was delighted because I'm the spitting image of my dad. So it's probably the second time in my life that someone's kind of made the connection first between Mum and me rather than Dad and me. But it's stayed with me over the years that I'm son of John too, but I'm son of Jean, right? I'm son of Jean, and that moment has stayed with me. But that's a really crucial part of who I am. It goes right to the core of my identity, doesn't it? That I'm the son of my mother. I'm the son of Jean. So that's story number one. Story number two I just read yesterday. Yesterday morning I was going through the interweb, as you do. I was flicking, I think, through Google, and I came across the story of a lady who's just had a book published, and it's her story of discovering at the age of 27 that the man that she called Dad wasn't her biological father. That in fact her mum had been the recipient of donor sperm, and so she didn't know who her biological dad was. Okay? And this story, the interview, which is based on the book that she's written, traced her journey to discover something about the whole kind of fertility industry, if you like, but particularly also her journey to find her biological dad. What really struck me as I read the story, which was heartrending in lots of places, but what really struck me about it was the desire for her to know her dad, her biological dad, yes, but in order to know something about herself. She felt like there was a piece missing because she didn't understand who she was in relation to the one who not had raised her. She had the guy that she'd called Dad for the first 27 years of her life had been a good father, but this other dimension, the one that had actually, that she was biologically conceived from. What I think both stories point to is the power and the importance of knowing who we are, and in a very real sense, whose kids we are, whose children we are. In the second reading today, it says, "Think of the love that the Father, that's God, has lavished upon us by letting us be called God's children, and that is what we are." So there's two pieces to that. One is that, like myself, I wonder whether, like myself with Mum, I knew, right, I was the son of Jean, but I didn't really, it's not something that I spent long hours reflecting upon. Mum's probably watching this morning, sorry Mum. It's not something I spent hours reflecting on something until somebody spoke to me and said, "You are son of Jean," and it struck me. It struck me. So the first part of that phrase in the second letter is, think of the love that has been lavished upon us by God, by the Father, by letting us be called God's children. And I just want to throw it out to you. Have you thought about it? Have you thought about it? That you are a child of God. Now that could sound nice and lovely and kind of pretty generic, very vanilla. But you are a child of God. And the key to understanding that is that the love of God has been lavished upon you. But I do suspect that sometimes we can go through our lives like I was in my 30s before this encounter stopped me in my tracks with that nun. We can go through our lives not necessarily really thinking about it. But as I want to get to in a moment, that's a life-changing kind of thing. To know that I am, to take time to think about the fact that I am a son or a daughter of God the Father. The second part about it is the way the phrase, I think John's really trying to make a point here. He says, look, think of the love that has been lavished upon us by letting us be called God's children. And then he goes on to say, and that is what we are. And that is what we are. In other words, it's one thing to think about it as well. It's one thing to tick a box and say, oh yeah, I'm a son or a daughter of God. That happened when I was baptized. Box ticked. It's another thing to I think what John's getting at here where he's saying, well, think about it. And then he's saying, and that is what we are, is he wants to really impress upon those that he's writing to that that's a reality, that it goes to the depths of our existence. It's not just an intellectual concept or a nice idea. It's actually something that is life-changing, that makes a difference, that changes how you live when you know that, not just simply as a concept, but as a reality. I remember that being really important for me when I just joined the Missionaries of God's Love, the community of priests that those of us here at St. Declan's belong to. I think I was 20, I was in my novitiate, so my second year, and I was on a young adults retreat and I'd gone to confession. I'm not going to tell you what sins I confessed, partly because I don't remember what they were, but I remember the penance I got. I remember the priest saying to me, what I want you to do is I want you to take the story of Jesus' baptism, the moment where Jesus is baptized. And then he said to me, but what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that instead of Jesus being baptized, you're being baptized. Now, I didn't know the language for it, but what he was teaching me there was about how to pray as St. Ignatius, one of the great saints of the church, teaches us to pray. So I go out from the little confessional room. I'm praying there, and I'm trying to picture the scene of me going down under the waters of the River Jordan and coming back up out. And what struck me in that moment was the words of the voice from heaven that said, you are my beloved son. You are my beloved son, and my favor rests on you. And that struck me in a way that it had not struck me before. That I was the beloved son. That God loved me. And the best description, the closest analogue for that love, if you like, is that he calls me son. He calls me son. That was so important to me, and I realised it was so important to me that literally for the next 6 months I prayed with that same passage every day. Every day. When you're in a novitiate, you've got lots of time to pray and you're not allowed to go anywhere. So it was easy, right? I had all the time in the world. I prayed with that passage every day. Why? Because I figured if I was going to be a missionary of God's love, I needed to know that. But that's not just something for priests, okay? This is the truth of all of us. It's about our baptism, not my ordination. That we are beloved daughters, beloved sons of God because we've been baptized. But you can just think about it or not think about it at all. And like St. John says, he wants you to know it. He wants you to be able to say, that is who I am. Because it is life-changing. It is life-changing. You see, if I know, the degree to which I know that I am loved perfectly by my Heavenly Father means that I don't need to compare myself to anybody else because I'm secure in the knowledge of who I am, that I'm loved by God. I don't need to try and overachieve or earn something. I'm not grasping after all sorts of other things because I know that I've got everything I need if God, my Father, loves me. I've got it all. And if I truly lived out of that every moment of my days, I'd be a saint. And you all know that I'm not. So the truth is that I don't live out the truth of it all the time. One great definition, if you like, of a saint is somebody who does live out of that truth. Consistently, maybe nobody can live it perfectly all the time, but consistently again and again and again. But again, it's not just something for saints. This is true for all of us. The difference between a saint and me is that the saints are able to live out of that truth far more often than I'm able to. But what we're called to, what we're invited to, what the great gift of us, John doesn't say this is just for the special people. This is just for priests. This is just for holy. He says, no, you are God's children. That is who you are. That is who you are. And that makes the most important practical of differences in your day-to-day life. In your day-to-day life. How do we, I'm really conscious, one of my friends here in the parish talks about how when the MGLs arrived in the parish, we talked about God's love again and again until one day she said, I was sick of it because I didn't know what they were talking about. How do you discover that? How do you experience what I'm talking about for yourself? Ultimately, it's about prayer. It's about asking. It's about saying, Jesus, I want to know that I really am a son or a daughter of the Father. It's okay to be frustrated by that and say, I really need to know. That's a prayer that God cannot fail to answer. God will answer that prayer. You ask that prayer, you ask it with faith, you ask it with persistence. God will not fail to answer that prayer. Why? Because he wants you to know that you are a son or a daughter of God more than you do. More than you do.